You think I don't know why you stayed? It was never about the money. Admit it.
And you think I don't know that you knew? You just needed me to say it first.
The check landed on her chest like a slap. Cold, precise, deliberate. Lira Sera didn't flinch. She had learned over 10 years never to flinch in front of Teodoro Laine. She lay very still against the light pink sheets of her own bed, in her apartment, while he sat up beside her, already reaching for his phone, already dialing back into the life she didn't belong to. The check had 4 zeros on it. She counted them quietly, the way she always counted things when she needed to stay numb. 1, 2, 3, 4. Stick to being my pillow, he'd said. Don't daydream about anything else. The morning light cut through the curtains and landed directly on the lipstick smear she'd spotted the night before, still faintly there on the cuff of his discarded shirt, deep crimson against white linen. Lira sat up slowly. She didn't cry. She was 23 years old, and she had cried for the last time at 19, the night she wrote his name across an entire diary page and then lost her nerve to tear it out. She picked up the check, folded it once, twice, set it on the nightstand, and made a decision that would cost both of them everything. The recruitment line stretched half a city block. Outside the glass tower of the Laine Group's Manhattan headquarters, parents stood with their children like they were auditioning them for something holy, which, in its own twisted way, they were. The ad had said it plainly: companion needed for teenage son recovering from trauma. Live-in arrangement. Excellent compensation. Discretion required. 13-year-old Lira Sera had found the posting tacked to a community board outside the shelter where she and her grandmother had been sleeping for 11 days. She'd torn it down quietly, smoothed the wrinkles out of it, and taken the subway uptown with exactly $4 and a crumpled number slip. She didn't tell her grandmother where she was going. She didn't really have a plan. She just sat at the end of that long, exhausted line, in clothes that had been washed too many times to still look clean, and promptly fell asleep crouched against the building's marble base. She didn't see Teodoro Laine when he came out. She didn't see the way his expression, already set into the hard, shuttered thing it had become since the kidnapping, flickered with something unreadable as his eyes moved down the row of eager faces, all of them alert, all of them performing. Then his gaze snagged on the small girl asleep in the corner, alone, unassuming, not performing anything. His security team exchanged glances. Teodoro pointed. Her. And just like that, 13-year-old Lira Sera became Teodoro Laine's human pillow. She didn't even wake up when they carried her inside. 10 years. Lira had learned the precise geometry of Teodoro's sleep within the first month. He needed her facing him. Left arm underneath, right arm across her back, her cheek against his chest, close enough that he could feel her breathing. If she shifted too far, he'd tighten his grip instinctively, even deep in sleep, a reflex, the doctors explained, left over from the kidnapping. His body needed to verify over and over that it was not alone. What the doctors never mentioned was what it did to Lira. What it does to a person to be held like they are the only safe thing in someone's world, while that same person, in daylight, treats them like furniture. She had watched him, over 10 years, cycle through women like seasons. They were always beautiful, always polished, always temporary. He'd bring them to hotel suites, to family dinners where they smiled carefully at his mother Marcella Laine's sharp, assessing eyes, to parties in penthouse apartments that looked like movie sets. And then, every night, without fail, Lira would knock on whatever door he was behind and say, quietly, Mr. Laine, it's time. The women always looked at her the same way, confused first, then annoyed, then something close to pity, which was the worst one. Teodoro would disentangle himself without apology, without explanation, and follow Lira down whatever hallway, into whatever prepared room, and lie down. He'd pull her against him, close his eyes, and sleep. She had hated it and loved it, and hated herself for loving it, and kept all 3 feelings in a locked diary with his birthday as the password. Idiota, she had written once, in Italian, referring entirely to herself. She'd underlined it twice. The Laine family was old money, made ruthless by ambition. Not the mafia, or at least not in any way they'd ever confirm. But there were rooms in the Laine estate in Westchester that Lira had never been allowed to enter. There were phone calls that made Teodoro's face go very still and very cold simultaneously. There were men who appeared without being summoned and disappeared the same way. Marcella Laine moved through her own home like a chess piece that had decided it was also the board. Elegant. Absolute. Impossible to outmaneuver. She had clocked Lira's feelings before Lira had fully understood them herself. "Don't mistake proximity for belonging," she'd said once, pouring tea with the practiced ease of someone delivering a death sentence. "Teodoro needs comfort. You provide it. That's the whole of what you are to each other." Lira had nodded. She'd been 16. She'd gone back to her assigned room and written Mrs. Laine is correct in her diary 3 times, trying to make herself believe it. What she hadn't written was, "But he called me Lyra tonight." Just for a second. And his voice was different when he said it. She'd pressed her pen hard enough to tear the paper and stopped herself. The password on that diary was 0314. March 14th. His birthday. She never changed it. The night Lira met Laine Moro, the lipstick on his collar was already a declaration of war, except only one of them knew it. The suite was at the Meridian 52nd floor, Manhattan, the kind of room that cost more per night than Lira's monthly rent. She arrived at 10 sharp, as always, keycard in hand, overnight bag over one shoulder. She heard voices before she opened the door. She opened it anyway. It was her job. Laine Moro was everything Lira was not, architecturally speaking. Tall, dark-haired, the kind of beautiful that had been carefully maintained and was therefore slightly aggressive about it. She wore one of Teodoro's dress shirts and nothing else, and she was pouting with the practiced ease of someone who had learned that pouting worked on most men. Lira stepped inside, set her bag down, moved toward the far side of the room with the quiet efficiency she'd spent a decade perfecting. Laine frowned. "Sorry, we don't need housekeeping." Teodoro laughed. Short. Amused. "She's not here to clean. A beat. She's mine." The possessive landed in the room like a stone into still water. Laine went still. Looked at him. Looked at Lira. Looked back at him. "You already have me. You're moving on that fast." He was leaning against the headboard, that half-smile on his face, the one that meant he was entertained and couldn't be bothered to pretend otherwise. He reached for the checkbook on the nightstand. 2 checks. Quick. Precise. He held them out to her without getting up. "You can leave now." Something shifted in Laine Moro's face. Lira watched it happen, the flicker of genuine feeling, quickly suppressed, quickly redirected into something harder. She'd seen that expression before. In mirrors. Laine picked up the checks. And then she slapped them back down onto the table. Chin up. Eyes clear. "I don't want your money." She picked up her dress from the floor and stepped into it with unhurried grace. "I had a good time." "So, did you?" "We're even." She walked out without looking back. The door clicked shut. Teodoro stared at the checks for a long moment. Lira saw his finger trace the edge of one, that flicker of something unfamiliar moving through his expression before his face closed back up. Then he looked at her, and the familiar arrangement resumed. He crossed the room, wrapped one arm around her waist, pressed his face into the crook of her neck. The scent of Laine's perfume was still in the air. Faint. Tenacious. Lira looked down and saw the lipstick on his collar. Crimson. Definitive. As if Laine had signed something. "You have lipstick on your collar," she said. Flat. Informational. Teodoro's voice was husky. "Close to sleep already. If it bugs you, I can change." She pressed her lips together. He lifted his head slightly, looked at her with those dark, hooded eyes that had kept her up more than his insomnia ever had. "Let's go to your place tonight."
Lira Bilinket.
In 10 years, he had never come to her apartment. She had always gone to him. She didn't ask why. She nodded. Her apartment was small, honest, and completely hers. Light-colored sheets, always. The mattress on the softer side. Pillows that smelled like lavender because she washed them twice a week out of habit, and maybe stubbornness. A collection of stuffed animals lined the far edge of the bed. A small bear with a missing ear, a rabbit she'd had since she was 8, a penguin her grandmother had given her the Christmas before she died. Teodoro stood in the doorway of her bedroom in the dark pajamas she kept for him. She kept pajamas for him, had always kept pajamas for him, had never once examined what that meant, and looked at her bed like it was a foreign country. Light pink duvet. Little stuffed animals. Freshly laundered everything. He looked completely, profoundly out of place. He got in anyway. He pulled her against him in the dark with the same practiced ease that had become their shared muscle memory, and she felt his nose brush against her hair. "Lira," he said quietly, "why does your bed smell so good?" "Everything's freshly washed," she murmured, already tired. He wasn't done. He shifted, searching, his nose tracing her jaw, her temple, the curve of her neck, until he found the spot below her ear. "Turns out this is the sweetest spot," he murmured. His warm breath moved against her skin, and she felt the shiver before she could suppress it. She turned her head to say something, to say stop or don't or please, and her lips accidentally brushed the line of his jaw. Both of them went completely still. Her heart was doing something medically inadvisable. She tried to shift away, quietly, carefully, the way she'd been trying to shift away from him for 10 years. He pulled her back. Immediately. "What are you running from?" Flat. Matter of fact. His hand pressed against her shoulder, heavy and warm. "Relax." A pause. "I'm not into scrawny girls like you." And there it was. The reset. The wall. The reminder of exactly what she was and was not in this arrangement. Lira closed her eyes. Right, she thought. Just a pillow. She went still in his arms and concentrated very hard on breathing at a rate that would not give her away. He was asleep within 4 minutes. She lay awake for 2 hours. She'd been 19 when she wrote his name across that page. It had happened the night he'd stepped in to deal with the debt collectors, men her late grandmother had owed, men who had shown up at Lira's door while she was still in college, men with quiet voices and quiet threats who had been very politely destroyed by Teodoro Laine before they'd finished their second sentence. He'd said nothing about it to her. Just straightened his cuffs. Left. That night, sitting on the floor of her dorm room, Lira had opened the diary and written his name. Once. Twice. And then she'd been writing like "and Theodore" and filling the margins and the lines until the whole page was nothing but those 2 words braided together, over and over, irrefutable. She'd come back to herself slowly, staring at the evidence of herself. She'd reached to tear the page out. Her hand had hovered there for a long time. She couldn't do it. She locked the diary, set the password, pressed it into the bottom drawer of her desk. She told herself it was safe there. She was wrong. She woke to silence and the particular quality of light that meant it was later than she'd slept in months. Teodoro was sitting in the chair across from her desk. The bottom drawer was open. The diary was in his hands. The lock had been defeated, not forced, she could tell, but worked through. Methodically, patiently. "What's this?" he asked. Flat. Not even looking up. Her brain ran several calculations simultaneously and arrived at a verdict she didn't like. "How did you open it?" she managed. The corner of his mouth lifted. Not warmly. "Tried all morning. Turns out the password is my birthday." He tilted his head slightly, examining her like a problem he hadn't expected to find interesting. An entry from 4 years ago. A pause. "Baby, you really hid this well." The word baby, delivered in that soft, almost wondering tone, made something crack behind her sternum. She said nothing. She waited. The sound of tearing filled the room. He tore the page out, slowly, deliberately. Then he tore it into pieces, smaller and smaller, and dropped them in the trash can beside her desk. "What were you dreaming of?" His voice had gone cold now. Back to the register, she knew best. "I don't settle down for girls like you, Lira. Those girls know what they're doing, what they're offering." He looked at her steadily. "Can you do that?" He left. He didn't come back for 3 days. On the 4th day, his assistant showed up at her door with a very drunk Teodoro Laine and an apologetic expression. "He drank quite a lot tonight. the assistant said carefully. Could you, Miss Sera? She looked at Teodoro. He was barely upright. His hair was disordered. He smelled like expensive whiskey and something that might have been loneliness, except she was probably projecting. She stepped aside. Let them bring him in. She went to make hangover soup. She was standing at the stove, watching the water come to a boil, thinking about absolutely nothing in particular, when a warm weight pressed against her from behind. His arms wrapped around her waist, the same way they always did in sleep, automatic and sure, and his chin came down on her shoulder. Lyra, he murmured. Different from Lira. Softer at the edges. He never called her that. She went very still. Are you okay? The soup will be ready in. He kissed her cheek, the corner of her mouth, the nape of her neck.
Warm. Soft.
Achingly deliberate for someone supposedly too drunk to stand. She tried to step away. She tried very hard. She reached for something, sense, pride, the memory of a torn-up diary page, and found her hands instead reaching up to wrap around his neck. This wasn't the first time. For years earlier, when they were 19 and the distance between them had been different, closer in some ways, sharper in others, Teodoro had overheard a conversation that ended everything. Marcella had summoned Lira into the sitting room of the Westchester estate, asked her, directly and without softness, what her intentions were regarding her son. Lira had been so afraid of getting it wrong, of losing the contract, of being sent away with nothing, that she'd assembled a perfect lie on the spot. It's just for the money, she'd said, clearly and firmly. I have no other feelings for Mr. Laine. She'd even asked for a raise. She hadn't known he was in the hall. That night, he'd come to her room. Not the way he was tonight. That time, he'd been something hard and jagged and hurt, though she hadn't understood the hurt until much later. You're only here for the money?
He'd said. Fine.
If I paid you enough, would you sleep with me? She'd been 19 and terrified and completely unwilling to be the one who said the true thing first. So she nodded. Yes. The memory of that night lived in her body still. Not the physical fact of it, though that was there too, imperfectly filed, but the specific quality of his voice asking that question over and over. Anyone could do this, as long as they paid you.
Right?
He'd needed her to say no. She hadn't known that then. By the time she understood it, the habit of distance was already load-bearing. They got on the small light pink bed. Later, much later, he pulled her against him in the quiet aftermath and kissed her lips. Softly.
Once.
His hand traced the curve of her waist like he was memorizing something. Your waist is so tiny, he said, his voice low and warm. How do you handle it earlier? He was laughing.
Teasing.
His hand moved to her back, slow and soothing. She lay in his arms and thought, maybe I mean something to him. She almost let herself believe it.
She almost.
She woke to his phone ringing. She reached for it before she was fully conscious. Instinctively, she'd been managing his life for 10 years, answering things, handling things, keeping things from disturbing him. She saw the caller ID. Laine. The ringing stopped. Everything stopped. She looked down and found Teodoro's eyes already open, looking up at her with an expression she couldn't read. He didn't look groggy. He didn't look guilty. He just looked at her steadily and took the phone from her hand.
Ciao, he said.
His voice shifted, something in it warming in a way she recognized, because she had spent 10 years cataloging his vocal registers. Laine Moreau's voice came through clearly in the morning quiet. Theodore, I heard you didn't sleep for 3 days. You went on a late-night drive just to chase after me? A pause. And then, brighter. Since you're being so sincere, I suppose I can forgive you. I'm up for anything tonight. Lira sat up. She looked at the wall. She listened to the sound of him smiling into the phone. She knew how his breathing changed when he was smiling, and she carefully, methodically, arrived at the conclusion she should have arrived at earlier. He'd been drunk last night. He'd said her name. But it was possible, it was probable, that it was not her name he'd been saying. Lyra. Laine. 4 letters at the front. Drunk and dark and reaching for the person he actually wanted. He hung up. She felt his gaze on the back of her head. Why was it you last night? He asked. She clenched her hands in her lap. It was me, she said finally. Who did you think it was? He didn't answer. And this was the part she would replay for a long time afterward, trying to find a version of it that didn't mean what it meant. He sighed. Baby, you really can't live without me, huh? Not a question. He reached past her, laid several checks on the sheet. You were pretty obedient last night. This is more than enough. His voice had that casual, almost bored quality she'd learned to dread. Stick to being my pillow from now on. Don't daydream about anything else. He got up.
He got dressed. He left.
The checks sat on the light pink sheet. Lira looked at them for a long time. Then she picked them up and put them in a drawer because she wasn't going to leave them there like evidence of something. She made herself coffee. She drank it standing at her kitchen window, watching Manhattan go about its impeccable business, and she made a decision so quietly that she almost missed making it. I'm done. The knock came that same evening. Marcella Laine didn't ring doorbells. She knocked 3 times, evenly spaced, with the authority of someone who expected the door to open before they finished. Lira opened it. Marcella was in her usual armor, charcoal Valentino, pearls, a face that had never, in Lira's memory, expressed anything without choosing to express it first. She came inside and sat at the kitchen table without being invited, which was also standard. She placed the renewal contract on the table,
pushed it forward.
The 5-year term is up, she said. Her voice was pleasant in the way that sharp things sometimes are. I've taken the liberty of drafting the renewal. The new rate is adjusted downward. A pause. Deliberate. Teodoro's been seeing someone. She tells me she can help him sleep. Lira looked at the contract. She looked at Marcella's face, that calm, certain expression. The face of a woman who had never once doubted that Lira would sign whatever was placed in front of her, because what choice did she have? The Laine family had funded her high school, her college, her apartment. 10 years of stable income when she'd arrived with $4 and a crumpled number slip. Marcella knew this. She was counting on it. Laine Moreau can help him sleep, Lira said. Not a question. Marcella's expression didn't change. She says so. Lira looked at the contract. Memories moved through her. Not dramatically, but with the quiet insistence of things that have been waiting their turn. The way he'd held her at 13, both of them just children with too much damage between them. The diary page in pieces in the trash. The checks on the pink sheet. Stick to being my pillow.
Don't daydream.
The checks he'd laid across her body with a laugh, like she was a hotel minibar he'd used and was settling the tab on. She picked up the pen. She set it down. She looked at Marcella for a long moment. I'm sorry, Mrs. Laine, she said. Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that. Let's end the contract. Marcella's composure fractured. Barely, just a hairline, but Lira had spent 10 years learning to read subtle things. You're serious? Yes. Teodoro will need. Teodoro has Laine Moreau. She stood. And I have somewhere to be. She didn't know where exactly, but she'd figured out. She always had. He didn't come for her that night. That was usual enough. He sometimes went 3 or 4 days between meeting her, when things were good, when he was in a new relationship, when whatever adrenaline high was keeping him distracted lasted long enough. But this time, the not coming was different. Lira knew it was different because she was already packing. Not frantically. Systematically. She'd always been a systematic person. She'd had to be. She packed the stuffed animals first, the bear, the rabbit, the penguin from her grandmother, and she was careful with them. Then her books. Then the practical things. She left the men's pajamas on the bed. She'd been keeping those for a decade. She set them on top of the folded sheets, considered them for a moment, then picked them up and put them in a bag for donation.
No monuments. No strains.
She called her college roommate, Celeste, who had been telling her for 3 years that there was a spare room in her place in Brooklyn. She'd always declined. Now she said, Is the offer still open? Celeste said, Get in a cab. The first night, Teodoro didn't sleep. He lay in the dark for 3 hours, and Laine Moreau, who was genuinely kind in a way she sometimes hid under brighter things, tried everything she could think of. She talked to him softly. She played music. She lay against his side. Nothing happened. He stared at the ceiling. The second night was worse. By the third night, she sat up in the dark and looked at him. This man who had chased her across the city, who had made her feel genuinely interesting, who had laughed at the right things, and she said quietly, "Who is she?" Teodoro turned his head. What? The girl. The one who was a pillow. Laine chose her words carefully. You haven't slept since she stopped coming. I'm not stupid, Teodoro. Who is she?
He was quiet for a long time. Nobody, he said.
He said it the way people say things they need to be true. Laine looked at him for another moment, then lay back down. She was still kind. She was also realistic. Nobody, she thought.
Sure.
On the fourth day, Teodoro Laine arrived at Lira's apartment. He had a key. He'd always had a key. The door opened onto stillness. The apartment had the quiet specific to empty things, not abandoned, but concluded. The furniture was there. The kitchen was clean. The light came in through the curtains the same way it always had. But the stuffed animals were gone from the bed. The men's pajamas were not in the drawer where she kept them. The bottom drawer of the desk, the one with the lock, was open. Empty. He stood in the middle of her bedroom and looked at the light pink duvet and felt something he didn't have a clean word for. He called her phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Her voice on the recording was professional. Unhurried. You've reached Lira Sera. Please leave a message. He hung up. He called again. He stood in her empty apartment and called 3 more times, and on the 5th call he finally said, after the beep, into the silence she'd left behind, "Where are you?" Not a question. A demand. Except it came out softer than that, which annoyed him considerably. If you're still here, you already know this isn't just a story. It's the feeling of being necessary to someone who never once called you important. Of being held every night by someone who handed you a check in the morning. Of being so close to a person for so long that leaving feels like losing a limb, except the limb never knew it was attached. He's calling her phone.
She's not answering.
And somewhere in that gap between them is a decade of everything they didn't say.
Subscribe.
Because the people who understand this kind of silence, they need to see what comes next. Lira's new room was smaller than her old apartment. It smelled like Celeste candles, something citrus and warm, and the walls were a different color, and the light came from a different direction, and she told herself that disorientation was normal, that it was fine, that she was fine. She got a job. She'd always had marketable skills. 10 years of managing Teodoro Laine's nighttime existence had made her extraordinarily competent at a large number of things. A private healthcare company hired her as a patient care coordinator within 2 weeks of her submitting her resume. She was good at it. She'd always been good at quiet, sustained care. She did not answer Teodoro's calls. There were 11 of them over the first 2 weeks. She cataloged them the way she cataloged everything, methodically, without allowing them to mean more than they were. She did not answer Marcella's calls either. There were 4 of those. She answered Celeste, who brought her coffee and asked no questions and sat with her in companionable silence on the fire escape on the evenings when the apartment felt too small. You want to talk about it? Celeste asked one of those evenings.
Not yet, Lira said.
Okay. Celeste poured more coffee. The guy's an idiot, though. Just so we're clear. Lira almost smiled.
He's not, she stopped.
Yeah, she said. He is. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours consecutively in 3 weeks. His assistant, Marco, watched him with the expression of a man deeply committed to his employment and therefore deeply committed to not saying the obvious thing. The obvious thing was, she's not coming back. You should probably call and apologize. But Marco had worked for the Laine family for 8 years and had survived this long by understanding what could be said and what could only be thought. Teodoro, meanwhile, was running on espresso and irritation and was becoming increasingly unpleasant to be around, which was saying something because he had never been particularly pleasant to be around. He'd snapped at 3 different people in a board meeting. He'd canceled a dinner with the Valentino group, an alliance his mother had been building for months. He'd thrown a phone against a wall, which was new. He called Laine. She answered on the second ring, which was itself information. I need to, he started. I know, she said. Not unkindly. But I'm not her, Teodoro. And you already know that. A silence. Whatever you did, Laine said, and her voice was gentle in a way he hadn't entirely expected. "You should probably undo it." He hung up. He sat in his office and looked at the Manhattan skyline and tried to assemble the problem logically. The problem was, he had given Lira Sera checks. He had given a lot of women checks. The problem was that Lira Sera had never, in 10 years, behaved like the other women. And he had treated her like the other women anyway, repeatedly and deliberately, and somewhere in that deliberateness was a shape he didn't want to look at directly. He opened his drawer. At the back of it, behind everything practical, was a small piece of folded paper. He unfolded it. His handwriting, old, clumsy at the edges. He'd been 19. "Lira," it said, "I heard what you told my mother. You're good at this." Knowing what to say. He'd written it, and then never given it to her. He'd meant it as an accusation. But he'd been 19 and hurt, and he'd written it at 2 in the morning, and somewhere between the writing and the morning he'd understood that what she'd said to his mother wasn't what he wanted to hear, but it was the smart thing for her to say. He'd kept the note anyway. He hadn't known why.
He was beginning to understand why.
He called his driver. There was something that had been living in the back of Teodoro's mind since he'd opened that drawer in her bedroom. He'd been awake when he did it. Early morning, Lira still asleep, her bed absurdly comfortable, the whole room smelling like someone who cared about small things. He'd been restless in the way he always was before full sleep caught him, and his eyes had landed on the desk, and the locked drawer had registered as a puzzle. He'd tried combinations quietly, one-handed, while she slept. It had taken longer than he expected. When the lock released and he saw the diary, he'd expected what he always expected from the people in his orbit. Strategy. Calculation. Evidence of someone working an angle. He'd opened to the page with his name written across it 50 times. He'd sat with it for a long time before she woke up. He'd torn the page out. He'd told himself he was doing her a favor, destroying evidence of something foolish, something that would only complicate a clean arrangement. He'd said the things he'd said because they were practical, because they were true, because he needed her to understand the limits of what they were. He'd watched her face while he said them. He had, specifically, watched her not flinch. Lira Sera had never, in 10 years, flinched. He understood suddenly, with the clarity that only comes from a specific kind of sleep deprivation, that he had spent 10 years handing her things designed to make her flinch, and she had absorbed every one of them without giving him the satisfaction, and he had experienced this as proof that she didn't care. He thought about the diary page. He thought about the birthday password. His birthday. Caso, he thought in the old language his father had used. You absolute idiot. He went to the Brooklyn address. He'd had Marco find it. Marco had found it with the efficiency of someone who had been waiting to be asked. The building was narrow and well-kept, in a neighborhood that had ivy climbing one wall, and a coffee shop on the corner that smelled excellent even from the sidewalk. Lira had found somewhere good.
Of course she had.
She was resourceful in ways he'd stopped noticing because they'd become background. He buzzed her apartment. A different voice came through the intercom. Female. Suspicious. Who is this? My name is Teodoro Laine. I'm looking for. She's not here. A pause. When will she be? I don't know. The voice had the particular quality of someone who knew exactly where Lira was and had made a prior commitment not to say. You can leave a message. He stood on the sidewalk. He was not accustomed to standing on sidewalks. He was not accustomed to doors that did not open. He left his number and felt the distinct experience of being on the wrong side of a system for the first time in memory. She saw him from the window. Celeste had given her exactly 3 minutes warning. Tall, dark, very expensive coat, very unhappy. I didn't let him up, and Lira had gone to the window and watched him stand on the sidewalk below with his phone in his hand. He looked terrible. Not visibly terrible. He was Teodoro Laine. He was always dressed exactly right, always composed enough to be architectural. But she knew his face in granular detail. She knew the specific set of his jaw when he hadn't slept, the way his posture changed when he was running on nothing, the way his hands moved when he was trying to look patient. He looked like he hadn't slept in 3 weeks. She pressed her forehead against the cold window glass. She had not cried. She had resolved not to cry. She had been profoundly successful at this until exactly this moment, when she watched him stand on the sidewalk below and look at her building like it owed him something, and felt the old, stubborn, mortifying love rising in her chest like water. "He's not a good man," she whispered to no one in particular. "No," Celeste agreed from behind her, without judgment. "He held me every night for 10 years and paid me like I was."
Yeah.
He tore the page out. "I know." She watched him get back into his car. She let out a breath she'd been holding since March 14th. The message arrived through formal channels. Not a phone call. A letter, actual paper in the Laine Group's letterhead, delivered to her new place of work, which meant someone had done research.
MAFIA'S sera.
The Laine family intends to dispute the terms of the agreement's termination. Legal counsel will be in contact regarding non-disclosure requirements embedded in the original contract. Lira read it twice. She called the college friend who'd become a lawyer, Petra Savio, sharp and practical and deeply unimpressed by wealth as a category, and read it to her over the phone. Petra was quiet for a moment. "Are there actual NDAs in there?" "There's a confidentiality clause." "About what?" Lira thought about 10 years of nights. About trauma and insomnia and the precise architecture of a man who couldn't sleep alone. About the things she knew, small, intimate, structural things about Teodoro Laine.
About everything, she said.
"Okay." Petra's voice went professional. "Don't respond to anything. Don't sign anything. Send me the original contract." Lira sent it. She sat at her desk at the healthcare company and felt, for the first time, the specific weight of being in someone's crosshairs. Not Teodoro's, she didn't think, but Marcella's. Marcella, who had decided that Lira walking away freely was a narrative she was not willing to leave uncontrolled. She thought about the girl she'd been at 13, asleep outside a building. She thought about Marcella sliding the renewal contract across the table, utterly certain of the outcome. She thought about the moment she'd said no. She picked up her phone. She typed a text to Teodoro, the first contact she'd initiated in 4 weeks. "Your mother is threatening legal action. I assume you know about this."
She sent it.
3 seconds later, her phone rang. She answered. "I didn't know about it," he said.
No preamble.
His voice was raw in a way she'd never heard in daylight. "I'll handle it. You don't need to."
Lira.
A pause. The kind of pause he'd always used as punctuation when words were insufficient. "I'll handle it." She was quiet. "Are you sleeping?" she heard herself ask. A longer pause. "No," he said. She closed her eyes. She stopped. "You should see Dr. Fiorelli. You have his number." "I know his number." A beat. That's not, he stopped too. They sat in silence on the phone together, which was, she realized, not actually that different from how they'd spent 10 years. Near each other, not talking about the actual things. "I want to meet," he said finally. "Teodoro." "Not for the contract. Not for the," his voice changed. Went quieter. "The register he used in the middle of the night," she thought. "Without the armor of daylight. I have things I need to say to you." She was quiet for a long time. "Okay," she said. Teodoro walked into his mother's sitting room at 7 in the morning. Marcella was at her desk. She was always at her desk, had been at her desk every morning of his life, impeccably dressed, already 3 steps ahead of the day. She looked up when he came in, and her expression made the small adjustment that meant she'd expected this visit. "The letter to Lira Sera," he said. Marcella set down her pen. "The NDA is a standard clause." She signed. "You don't have grounds, and you know it." He came into the room fully, which made it a different kind of conversation. "The clause covers disclosure of family business operations. Lira knowing how I sleep is not. Lira knowing a great deal of things about you is not something I'm willing to leave unmanaged," Marcella said. "Even controlled." She was an employee, Teodoro. She left without notice. The legal. She gave 30 seconds of notice. "To your face. You're doing this because she surprised you." Marcella's eyes held steady. "I'm doing this because she's a liability." "She's not a liability. She knows you." Marcella's voice went quieter, more deliberate, the way she always spoke when she meant the sharpest thing. "She knows everything. How you sleep, what you're afraid of, how long it took you to stop flinching after what happened to you at 13. In the wrong hands, that's a vulnerability. In the press, it's a story. In a lawsuit, it's leverage. He stood there. Because she wasn't wrong and she wasn't right, and the gap between those two things was where everything lived. She's not going to the press, he said. You're certain of that? Yes. Why? He looked at his mother for a long moment. Because she never told anyone anything. 10 years. She never told anyone a single thing about me. He said it quietly, but it landed. She kept a locked diary in a desk drawer, and the password was my birthday, and she never showed it to anyone. Marcella was quiet. Drop the letter, he said. Today. A pause. Long calculating.
Fine, she said.
And then, softer, which was the most frightening thing she ever did. Be careful, Teodoro. He turned to go. She's not a pillow, Marcella said. She never was. I knew that at 13, and I was afraid of it. I'm less afraid of it now. A beat. That's all I'll say. He left without responding. But he heard it. He chose a place that had no strategic significance. Not a family restaurant. Not a hotel. Not anywhere that was his. A small cafe on the Lower East Side, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and real espresso, and no one who would recognize either of them.
She was already there when he arrived.
Of course she was. She was always early. She'd been managing his schedule for a decade, and she'd organized herself the same way she organized everything else. Quietly, without drama, before anyone asked. She was in her coat. Her hair was down. She looked better than she had any business looking, given that she was in a place of coffee and chairs in Brooklyn-adjacent Manhattan on a Tuesday afternoon. She also looked, he realized as he sat down across from her, like herself. Like the person who existed when she wasn't being careful around him. He had seen it before. He had not, he acknowledged, paid sufficient attention. The letter has been withdrawn, he said. I know. Petra called me. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. You didn't need to. I needed to. He looked at her directly.
Lira.
She looked back at him. I owe you an apology, he said. A significant one. Something moved through her expression. Surprise, quickly managed. Teodoro. Let me. He folded his hands on the table. I'm not good at this. You know that. You probably know that better than anyone. He paused. The checks. What I said. That morning. He looked at her steadily. All of it was wrong. She was very still. You weren't just here for the money, he said. I knew that. I think I knew that for a long time. But saying the other thing, making you into something transactional, that was easier. Because the other thing was...
He stopped.
Dangerous. Dangerous, she repeated. For me. He said it plainly. Lira, I've been afraid of things that matter since I was 13 years old. You were the first, he stopped again. Started over. You have been the only person in my life who knew me at my worst and stayed anyway. Not because I was paying you. You stayed because he exhaled. You're you. She looked at the table. I tore the page out, he said. I know you did. I shouldn't have. I tore it out because it scared me. Because seeing that he pressed his mouth together. I've been a coward, Lira. And I've been cruel. And I understand if you don't want to, he stopped. I'm not going to make promises I can't keep. I'm not a good man.
You've seen that.
I've seen a lot of things, she said quietly. Yes. A silence. I haven't slept, he said, in a month. I know. It's not the trauma response anymore. He held her gaze. It's you specifically. It was so different from 10 years of being held without being seen that she sometimes had to remind herself they were talking about the same man. He was not, she noted, transformed. He was still abrupt. Still occasionally arrogant in the way of people who've never had to apologize much and are learning the mechanics of it belatedly. He said the wrong thing twice in the first week and had to be corrected, which he received with the grace of someone who had decided to receive things with grace regardless of how much it cost him. She corrected him honestly, without softening it. He listened. She found this, against all expectation, devastatingly appealing. She ran into her, not dramatically. Just on a sidewalk in Soho, on a Thursday afternoon, both of them heading in different directions. Laine Moreau recognized her first.
She stopped.
They looked at each other. I should probably apologize, Laine said after a moment. You didn't do anything wrong, Lira said. I called you housekeeping. You didn't know. Laine tilted her head slightly. She had the direct, assessing quality of someone who had learned to evaluate situations quickly and honestly. He couldn't sleep, she said. Not a single night. He was terrible company, actually, which I found out about 3 days too late.
She paused.
You should know that. Not because I want credit for figuring it out. Just because she searched for the word. He's not the same man when you're not in the equation. Lira was quiet. I'm not heartbroken, Laine said clearly.
I'm practical.
And I'm good at reading rooms. She looked at Lira with something straightforward. You've been waiting a long time. 10 years. Laine exhaled. Make him work for it. Lira almost smiled. I am. Good. Laine shifted her bag on her shoulder. You look like someone who deserves the full effort.
She walked on.
Lira stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Then she texted Teodoro. I just ran into Laine Moreau. His response came in under 10 seconds. Are you okay? She stared at the message. Yes, she typed. She's perceptive. She told me to make you work for it. A long pause. Then, she's right. She laughed out loud on the sidewalk. People looked at her. She didn't mind. It was 6 weeks after she'd left. She invited him to dinner. Her apartment, her cooking, the small kitchen she'd made her own. Not because she was trying to prove anything. Because she decided she wanted to, and she'd also decided that her wants were worth the same respect as anyone else's. He came on time. He stood in her new apartment doorway in a coat that cost more than her monthly rent and held out a bottle of wine that he'd clearly asked someone to research because it was exactly the kind she liked. Not too sweet, not too heavy, a Tuscan blend she'd mentioned once months ago in passing. She raised an eyebrow. Marco helped, he admitted. Of course he did. I told him what you usually ordered at restaurants. He cross-referenced it. He looked almost embarrassed. Almost. I'm learning. She took the wine. Come in, she said. They ate at her small kitchen table. She'd made pasta, simple, real, the kind her grandmother had taught her. He ate 2 full servings and said almost nothing during the first one because he was, she'd always known, a person who showed appreciation through attentiveness rather than words. He asked about her grandmother, who had never come up in 10 years. Somehow, she told him. He listened the way he listened in the dark, fully, without the distraction of his own agenda. She told him about the shelter, about the line outside his building, about falling asleep against the marble. I know the rest, he said. I was there. You remember? I remember everything about that day. He looked at his wine glass. I've been inside that room of applicants for 20 minutes and every single face was, he paused. They all wanted something, which is fine, but it was all they were doing, wanting. He was quiet. And then you were asleep. She waited. You weren't performing anything, he said. You were just, he struggled slightly. There. Without agenda. He met her eyes. You were 13 and exhausted and completely uninterested in being impressive. I didn't know why that mattered. I just pointed. Lucky me, she said dryly. His mouth curved. Yeah, lucky you. She looked at him across the small table. Did it ever occur to you, she said carefully, to just tell me any of that? He considered this seriously. No, he said. Because telling you would have meant, he set his glass down. Lira, I've been afraid since I was 13 years old. I know how to protect myself. I know how to make sure nothing matters enough to hurt me. He held her gaze. You already mattered. You had for years. If I said it out loud, it became real, and if it was real, I could lose it. You lost it anyway, she pointed out. Yes. He held her gaze. I lost it because I was so busy protecting the thing for myself that I handed it away. He paused. I'm aware of the irony. She was quiet. The page, he said. The diary page. He looked at the table. I tore it out because I was ashamed that I'd needed to read it as many times as I did. Before you woke up. He raised his eyes to hers. I practically memorized it. The air in the small kitchen shifted. I have no idea, he said quietly, how to do this correctly. I know how to be what I am, which is not especially good and not especially gentle, and generally not the kind of person that, he stopped. I know how to hold you while I sleep. I know how your voice sounds when you're actually comfortable versus when you're managing me. I know you have a stuffed bear with a missing ear, and you've had it since before you can remember, and you've never once told me why. He looked at her. I'd like to know why. She felt the tears come and did not stop them for once. My grandmother won it at a carnival, she said. The summer before she got sick. She gave it to me because she said it already knew it was loved even with a piece of it missing. He was quiet. That's the kind of thing, he said finally roughly, I should have known 10 years ago. Yes, she said. You should have. Tell me the rest, he said. All of it. Whatever I missed. She looked at him across the table. That's going to take a while, she said. I'm not going anywhere. He held her gaze steadily. Without agenda. Without performance. I haven't been sleeping anyway. She almost smiled. I know. Is that, he paused. Try it again.
Lira.
Would you be willing to? He looked uncomfortable in the way of people making themselves vulnerable for the first time without the cover of darkness or alcohol. Not as a contract. Not as, he pressed his mouth together. I'd like to try.
With you.
As myself. The actual version, which I'm told is still largely a work in progress. She looked at him for a long moment.
Teodoro, she said. Yeah.
You should know that if you pay me in checks again, I will leave and I will not come back. Understood. And if you introduce me to anyone as your personal pillow, I'll pour that Tuscan wine on your suit. Also fair. And you're going to ask me questions.
About me. Consistently.
Not just when you remember. I'll set a reminder, he said, completely seriously. She almost laughed again. Okay, she said. Yeah. She rose from the table and picked up both plates. But tonight, Teodoro, you're washing the dishes. He looked at the sink like it was mildly hostile territory.
I can do that, he said. He did.
He was not especially good at it. She stood beside him and showed him, and their hands moved through the warm water together, and the kitchen smelled like pasta and Tuscan red wine and the faintest trace of something she'd spent 10 years not letting herself want. He stayed. Not as a contract. Not under any clause or condition. He stayed because she let him, and she let him because she'd made a deliberate decision to stop shrinking the size of what she deserved. He slept. Not perfectly. There were still nights when he'd reach for her in the dark with something like desperation, when the echo of 13-year-old terror moved through him, and she'd press her hand to his chest and say, quietly, I'm here, and he'd breathe around it until the darkness settled back into just dark. But he slept. He also slowly learned her. The bear with the missing ear sat on her nightstand. He knew its name, Capitano, because she'd been 8 and apparently devoted to maritime themes, and he said it without irony. He learned that she took her coffee with 1 sugar and that she read 2 books simultaneously, 1 fiction and 1 not. He learned that she was funnier than he'd noticed, drier and more precisely timed than the environment he'd created around her had ever given her room to be. He learned that she had opinions about architecture, strong ones, and that she would defend them without apology. He learned that she cried exactly twice a year, not from sadness, she explained, just from pressure release, like a kettle, and that she did it privately, and that this was not something to intervene in. He learned to knock before entering rooms she was in. She learned, with some surprise, that he was capable of growth. That he'd chosen, deliberately and at cost, to become different enough in the specific ways that mattered. That the man who'd handed her checks like timestamps was capable of standing in her kitchen at midnight making inadequate tea and asking, with complete sincerity, how do you actually like it? I've never asked. Honey, she said.
No milk.
He remembered forever after. She met Lira for lunch, 3 months later. Not in the Westchester estate. At a restaurant in Midtown, a small one, neutral territory. Marcella looked at Lira across the table with the same assessment she'd always applied, cataloging, weighing, arriving at verdicts. You're not what I was afraid of, she said finally. Lira held her coffee cup. What were you afraid of? Someone opportunistic. Someone who understood what she had access to and would use it. Marcella paused. You had access. For 10 years. And you never used any of it. No, Lira agreed. Why not? It was a genuine question. From a woman who genuinely didn't understand it. Lira considered. Because he'd already been through enough, she said. Someone taking advantage of him at his worst would have, she stopped. He trusted me with the worst of him. That's not a resource. That's a responsibility. Marcella was quiet for a long moment.
He's sleeping, she said.
Yes. He's different. He's working on it. Marcella made a small sound that might, from another woman, have been called a laugh. You're going to give me trouble, she said. Probably, Lira agreed. But I'll be polite about it. Another of those sounds. Then Marcella picked up her menu, which meant the emotional portion of the conversation was concluded. The Valentino dinner is next month, she said. Teodoro will need you there. He already asked me. Good. She didn't look up. Wear the blue. You have the right coloring for it.
Lira blinked.
The closest thing Marcella Laine would ever come to saying welcome.
Thank you, Lira said.
That night, Lira lay in the dark of the apartment that was hers. The light pink duvet, the soft mattress, the pillows that smelled like lavender, Capitano on the nightstand, and felt Teodoro's arms settle across her waist in the particular way it always had. Face to face, the way he needed. His breath evening out slowly. He was asleep in 8 minutes. She lay awake for a little while longer, as she sometimes did, listening to the sound of Manhattan outside the window and the sound of him breathing and the quiet, fundamental fact of her own life, which had arrived at something real through a door she'd almost never opened. She thought about the 13-year-old girl asleep against a marble building with $4 in her pocket. She thought about what she'd have told her if she could have.
You're going to be chosen, she thought.
Randomly, and without ceremony, by a boy who can't sleep. And it's going to cost you and hurt you and take a decade to resolve. But you're going to do it with your whole heart even when your whole heart is the inconvenient thing. And eventually, not right away, not cleanly, he's going to choose you back. Deliberately. On purpose. In full daylight. It's worth it. I promise it's worth it. She closed her eyes. She slept. If this story found you, if you've ever been the one who stayed, who knew someone completely while being only partially known, who kept loving quietly in a locked drawer with someone else's birthday as the password, then you understand what this cost. And what it was worth. Share it with someone who's been waiting too long to be chosen back. Subscribe, because these are the stories that deserve to be told. Not the easy ones, not the clean ones. The ones where love is complicated and real and worth every single page. And if you want to know what happens next, the Valentino dinner, Marcella's slow thaw, the first time Teodoro tells her he loves her in actual words and gets it completely wrong before he gets it right, tell me in the comments. Because some stories don't end. They just finally begin.